welcome to the Data Democracy. Presented by renowned O'Reilly author Ole Olesen-Bagneux. Powered by Xenia. Make your data accessible and discoverable by anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Hi, Malcolm.
Hi, Ole. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Very good, thank you. Very happy to be with you today.
I'm excited to have you on. Okay, so I will do a bit more formal introduction of who you are, and also just say briefly that I'm your host, Ole Olesen-Bagneux. I'm chief evangelist in Xenia, and I'm the author of the Enterprise Data Catalog, published by O'Reilly. In this podcast, we explore what a data democracy is. A data democracy is something that I believe every company needs, but it's something also that comes with a lot of limitations, a lot of very difficult decisions to make, and also it's quite difficult to define a data democracy, and so that's what we talk with the guests about. And today's guest is Malcolm Chisholm. Malcolm is considered an international data governance expert. He is a DAMA Lifetime Achievement Award winner, a seasoned keynote speaker, author, board member, and finally he is a bilingual as he is fluent in Spanish. Malcolm has his own consultancy company called Data Millennium, providing advice on all things data governance and management. He has a PhD and this is academic studies at the University of Oxford and the University of Bristol. Malcolm is an author of several books, of which Definitions in Information Management is the latest. The book provides a practical approach on how to write, govern, and manage definitions in information management, and these are often done quite poorly, hence the reason for the book. And I can definitely confirm that. Anyway, I will also just mention that I came across your profile, Malcolm, as you began posting, or at least when I noticed you began posting about data catalogs on LinkedIn. And your posts were very thought-provoking. So I actually have a quote from one of your posts. So I'm going to read out loud here. Suppose a data catalog captures 2 million database columns, probably about right for a mid-size enterprise data landscape. How many data owners will there be? Maybe 100? That is 20,000 columns per data owner on average. Does it really sound feasible to tell someone they are accountable for 20,000 columns on top of their day job? And so, Malcolm, what I like about this thinking is that it's rooted very much in the pragmatic realities of data management. And so, just to open the conversation, can you share a bit more about your work experience, Malcolm, and what you do?
Sure, Ole, and thank you very much for your work too on data catalogs and all that you do. It's very helpful to the community. My background initially was in IT as a programmer. I guess what would be called an engineer today, but a programmer. And, I kind of developed systems, worked my way up through that, and not just developing applications, in the end ending up developing products as well. As part of that, I got interested in database design and databases in general, especially when data modeling was getting started and the data modeling tools. So I was very fortunate to be, actually associated with Irwin when they started. So that gave me much more of an interest in data, how it's managed, how it's designed, metadata. And from there, I went to reference data, master data management, got involved in those topics quite deeply, as well as still doing development activities, including building business rules engines, which is metadata engineering, using metadata to do programmatic kinds of things rather than handcrafting programming. And from there, kind of got into the more strategic elements of data governance as it became. That I think that became popular around 2005. So, and then it's been sort of the explosive growth of data governance and all the capabilities within it, which seem to be growing all the time. I mean, data privacy, for instance, suddenly, it was always a concern, but it got much more prominent after 2016. And that's a core capability now in data governance. So trying to work with all these different capabilities of data governance and what they mean today. So today, much more on the strategic advisory side than when I first started out. So that's a brief resume of my experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Malcolm. I think this is, of course, very interesting. I noticed that, so you have worked with data governance in quite a bit of time, and it on your LinkedIn profile, it also says that you have what is called a Dharma Lifetime Achievement Award winner. What is that? How do you obtain such a status or
Well,
category?
these awards are handed out by DAMA, which is the DAMA International, the Data Management Association, and they have a website. They do a lot of things. They play a very central role in all things data, I think. They have local chapters. They promote the industry. So they do give out periodically these awards, and they are, for me, it's where you've done something special. For me, it was like master and reference data. I've written the only book on reference data, and I think that was part of it. So very honored, obviously, to have that award. It's very prestigious, and I'm very grateful to DAMA International.
Yes, I can definitely understand that that you will feel honored about that award. I've been following Dharma for quite a while, and the data management book of knowledge is a really important reference, both in my own work and in terms of book, but also just working with data in my everyday work. It's quite important. So, are you part of a Dharma chapter, or are you part of Dharma in the US or UK, or have you simply received the honor as an outsider, or how did that work?
No, I'm part of DAMA. I interact with them here in the US by going typically to the conferences they put on. We don't, unfortunately, seem to have a chapter in the particular area that I live, although this changes from time to time, so that may not be accurate anymore, and I should check it. Were they to do so, then I would certainly be, a member of my local chapter, and I would encourage everybody to become members of their local chapters too.
Yes, it is a truly international organization, and there are many people that are affiliated with Dharma in my network, and the Danish chapter where I live in Denmark is not very mature. They are building it, and I think it's maturing, but it is very new. Okay, so talking a bit more about your experience, you have moved from more practical elements you mentioned in the beginning of your career towards more strategic advisory. Is that simply a result of experience, or was it a deliberate choice to go in a more strategic direction?
Somewhat of a deliberate choice, because if you want to remain at the technical level, you're obliged to deal with changing ways of technology. Okay, so let's say you wanted to be a developer or a programmer or an engineer. As the languages change, then you have to master those. And you can see this particularly, with things like reporting packages, where they seem to, change rather frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to learn the latest and greatest. So it's quite painful to do that. The way to avoid it is to go away from that to things that are more analytical or design oriented or strategic, where yes, you still have to learn things, but you're not forced so much by every couple of years something changing in technology.
Yes, definitely. And I also guess that even though the languages changes, the technology changes, many of the dilemmas are the same. I mean, I see a lot of repetition, at least, in terms of what problems occur when we work with technology.
I think you're right about that. I've been thinking about that quite a lot this week, thinking about how as previous generations of technology were discarded, so was all the knowledge and learnings from them too. So
Yeah.
we're condemned to repeating past mistakes. In fact, I think there's been some kind of break in the cultural transmission of things like data modeling from from let's say 20 plus years ago to the data engineering teams of today, where it's not infrequent that you'll find data engineering teams that don't really have a background in what should be industry standard uh, data modeling concepts and techniques. And there's other things like that too, which is super interesting. How did that break in cultural transmission occur?
Yeah, how did it occur? I mean, I've been listening to, for example, Bill Inman. Some call him the father of the data warehouse. It is definitely true that he played a big part in inventing the data warehouse, right? He put forward this it's a bit too much to call it a thesis, but he thinks this cultural loss is rooted in the fact that IT employees are always in demand. And so the way people in IT get a raise is to simply shift position between companies. That creates this cultural vacuum where you can't pass your knowledge on to anyone. Maybe that is rooted in, maybe that is why. I don't know. What do you
Partly,
think?
partly. I think if we go back to 1964, when the computerized age first began with the appearance of IBM Series 3 mainframes, there was clearly at that point, and I do this because it's easier to think about these things this way, there was nobody in a organization, a company, who could work with computers by definition because there weren't any up to that point. So they had to recruit IT people from outside of the organization. And this was the beginning of the sort of IT business divide because those people, by definition, knew nothing about the business, or maybe a few did, but almost certainly knew nothing about the business they were coming into. They remained more oriented or aligned to the IT industry than the enterprises they worked for over time, and it persisted. And I think what's happened, we've seen something similar seems to have happened with the emergence of big data. Well, big data's dead now; it's gone.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, agreed,
so
agreed.
but something happened with the new cloud technologies that it spawned, whereby there was a yes, you're right, a strong demand for IT professionals, but rather than them coming from a continuous sort of background culture, I think they've come in some way from something that's new and weren't subject to any knowledge transfer from their predecessors, and there may have been no predecessors. So something like that has happened. That's my hypothesis. Clearly, I can't prove it, but something like that is going on, and it means these people we're all condemned to relearn, what it means to have normalized data and things like that, which is not a very, pleasant prospect. But there's something like that is going on.
Yeah, I completely agree. All my practical experience tells me that you're right in this. I have been in the field in 20 so years, and that is definitely also my experience. And
Sorry, may I add that
of
I
course,
think that there's also a distaste for history, or a feeling that, what could I possibly learn from a COBOL programmer kind of attitude.
exactly,
It's
exactly.
like that technology is dead, so these people have nothing. They learn nothing that's of any use to me.
Yeah,
Okay, why would I ever waste my time listening to them? So something like that is also playing into this.
yeah. There's this. It's deliberately ahistoric, this field too, right? So contrary to many other disciplines that respect the course of history and learn from that, political science, humanities, also many of the natural sciences, right? They learn from history. They need to learn, I don't know, Pascal's law, for example, in physics, stuff like that. They need to learn history in order to understand their area of study. But in computer science and in IT, it's very much regarded as irrelevant and also a little dubious if you're interested in historic aspects of the computer history in general.
Right. I mean, I think it might be tolerated as some kind of, fringe academic interest, um, but that it has no relevance to the work that people are doing today. Whereas you're right, a true science is an organized body of knowledge which accumulates over time. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not that there's, what we have, which seems to be periodic episodes of technology where the old order is torn down, and then people attempt to rebuild something maybe based on better technology, but not the methodologies and the organizational aspects that go around it.
Yeah. Um, I wanted earlier in the conversation to introduce the idea of data democratization, as this is what we try to understand in this podcast. But I do think that you have already touched upon it without really addressing it. But you mentioned prior to our conversation here that you have had some considerations on data democratization. So can you elaborate on that? Does it?
Yeah. Again, if we take a historical, viewpoint, if we look back in time, we can see that there's been periodic rebellions of business users against IT. It happened with mid-range. This is kind of outside of my personal span of experience, but it happened with mid-range sort of mainframe computers. It then happened again in the early 80s or mid 80s with the introductions of PCs. And we've seen it again, various episodes up to and including COVID, where digital transformation occurred, with the business leading the way in many places, and IT in a secondary role as businesses had to quickly move to online models. So what seems to happen is that there is unfulfilled demand in business areas, and there is also what is perceived to be a sclerotic IT environment, which is dominated by ways of working that don't get a lot of business users what they need. Okay, so that's a general background. More specifically, if you look into business, you look at let's think of a fairly large enterprise, and we look into the business areas of that. Those business areas are broken down, obviously, into smaller and smaller business units, and then within those business units, teams doing specialized things. Those teams are doing their own little specialized thing. okay, maybe a team of half a dozen people. Now, they have needs for automation and data management, okay? So, what would happen if they tried to get those fulfilled by IT? IT would come along and say, yes, we're agile, so it's going to take us 6 months to do this. Okay. And we're agile, so you're going to have all of the project manager, a business analyst, or this, that, and the other. Okay. So let's go a bit further. We get going on this, and the project manager comes in. I'll just say it, might be unpopular, doesn't understand the technology or the business, but understands task management.
Yeah.
And we have a business analyst now. Our team of 6 people have to explain to the business analyst the business problem. The business analyst is, by definition, not going to be familiar with their problem, okay, or their business area, okay. So, and they're going to translate that and give it to developers or engineers or somebody else, okay. So, it's quite likely that the business folks don't have the time or energy to explain what their requirements are. And then you get into everything failed because you didn't tell me your requirements, or you didn't tell me them accurately or fully. Okay, this is what always inevitably happens, when with failure to deliver. So, but we still have the need of our little team of 6 people. So what would happen if those 6 people could do whatever it is they wanted to do by themselves? They understand the business problem. What they don't understand or don't have access to is the technology to satisfy their demand. And to me, I think this is the core of at least from one viewpoint, what data democracy might be. It would be enabling them to do whatever it is they need to do. And if you replicate that up by all these little teams across a vast, business landscape, it's a massive impact versus, IT, which is going to be needed really if we're going to, choose a new ERP system or something like that. Some more on the mega project side, but that's not aligned to the kind of data democratization I'm thinking of. That there might be some other viewpoint on data democratization for ERPs, but I'm thinking of all this massive array of unfulfilled needs which could be fulfilled if we had access to data, technology, methodology, knowledge, and these other things. So that's my, the viewpoint I would like to express.
Yes, I can definitely relate to this, Malcolm. Having worked in multiple companies from within IT departments, it simply resonates with the experience that I've had, that some people in IT, some leaders in IT, they are pushing very much against what has been coined as shadow IT. Small islands of IT departments inside the business, and then other IT departments completely embrace such quote unquote shadow IT. I think with the emergence of cloud technology, I don't think a lot of companies has the choice. Many many teams around in an organization will begin to simply do IT on their own, because the skill set needed is lowered with the evolution of cloud technology. So, or at least the dependency to a variety of skill sets, right?
Right. So I absolutely agree with you, and I think it's called shadow IT is kind of like it's a term of depreciation or something like that. It's not elevating it to something that is wonderful. So we give it this
Agree.
name, and end user computing is another one. So
Uh-huh.
so we have it, but I think it's more like dark matter in the universe. There's actually much more of it going on that IT appreciates. They just don't have necessarily a way of truly measuring the amount of of what I would call business data processing that's going on. Okay, it's enormous, and in fact, all companies run on these things. So, how do what's the approach? Well, the IT approach would be some cases to try to centralize it, which is impossible because,
Yeah.
as we just discussed, you can't even you would not be able to understand all of these individual requirements through the normal systems development life cycle, even if it's agile. Okay, so that's then the skills, the cloud computing gives us the environments to do it in. Okay, I think also what's going on that's extremely important is the no-code, low-code revolution, where we've got SaaS tools that perform tasks which don't require coding or require very little coding. Okay, and these things are becoming wildly popular. And they also include the integrations amongst them. And those integrations are themselves no code, low code. Okay, so it's not like you need if you want to build something with a simple UI and a relational database behind it to manage for simple list management or workflow management, you've got it. You don't need to go to IT. You the user or the business person rather can just do it. Now, the question then becomes governance. Okay, do you want the Wild West or Mad Max more likely coming out of this? Okay, yes, the individual user teams are building this, but if we go back to our IT analogies, there's things that IT does that are actually critically important, for what they or should be doing, things like backups, restores, dealing with SLA issues, knowledge management. How do we do that in a data democratization? Is data democratization anarchy because we've got the capabilities now, or are we going to have people who are going to use it in a responsible way, and it's more of a, what a democracy should be? They exercise their obligations as true citizens of, of the republic, as it were, rather than just, everybody does their own thing and nobody cares what anybody else does, and it's not sustainable. So that's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, it definitely is, right? I mean, I'm thinking about all the hustle and bustle I've been in as an enterprise architect when previous in my career. When you talk about these things, Malcolm, I I also remember one of the key elements that come into play if you open up. I really like, I gotta say, the term end user computing. I haven't honestly heard it before, but it's way better than shadow IT, and it's more positive, right? I think the identification of capabilities is something that you need to take into consideration when you democratize IT and democratize data as you democratize IT. Imagine that every single part of your organization wants to do finance management. That's pretty logical. Every part of the business has its own budget.
Yeah.
If they all went along and bought an ERP system themselves, the bill, that would cost an awful lot, right? So as you highlight, right, there is some need for central governance or control in what we could call a data democracy, and just understanding that is quite difficult. I mean, I don't have the answer. That's part of the conversations we have here.
Right. I think there still has to be centralized capabilities. So, for instance, one of the things that concerns me is with the growth of people creating data pipelines, independent teams. they do their own data acquisition. So data acquisition is when you buy a data set, let's say from a data vendor from outside of the corporation that you work for or organization you work for. Okay, so I get it that you need, a data set for, I know, the weather in Scandinavia for the past 100 years, because it's maybe some kind of weird actuarial solution you're creating here. Okay, fine. Well, if you think of that data democratization is that you, the data engineering team building the pipeline, goes out and finds that and just buys it with your budget, it's problematical. It's problematical because you, as a data engineer, don't have the capacity to analyze the contract for, say, atypical terms in it, such as you can't use the data that you're buying to derive other data, or you can't distribute it, in more than this kind of fixed way, or the data vendor can do unannounced audits on you to find out what's going on. That's you're not specialized to do that. Hence, you do need some kind of centralized data governance unit that might also centralize the inventory of subscriptions in a catalog, and could say, well, we already have such a subscription, just go and use that. So the centralized capabilities that are going to be needed within this democratic framework, and I think part of what we have to do for the data part of the world is figure out what those are. Okay, but that's an example, one that I think is fairly clear. So we can't just have people running amok and doing these things.
No, and that's the fine balance in these discussions, centralized versus decentralized, and IT departments versus business. Time is actually up. I think we could go for quite a lot more time if we had.
Well,
time.
we should another time, Ole. I'd be very happy to continue the conversation.
Likewise, Malcolm. I will do some takeaways. Try to wrap up some of the things that we have talked about. I would like to hear if I got it. Well, not everything, but highlights of what we talked about, if it's correctly understood. Okay, so first of all, you mentioned that we are a little deemed to repeat the past mistakes in IT. For example, about data modeling, and you talked about the beginning of the IT and business divide, stretching all the way back to mainframe computers. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And so that is more or less as long as we have had modern computing, at least.
Yeah, it's an original sin of computing.
Yeah, that's a nice way to phrase it. Also, you talked about data rebellions, and there have been several of these rebellions from mainframe, personal computers, and online here in the COVID area. That is also the no-code, low-code revolution.
Yeah.
We talked about these. So I guess talking about democratization, it's pushed forward by evolution, but also a little bit by revolutions.
Yes. You touched upon this too, Ole, that there's a lot of resentment towards IT not being able to fulfill user needs.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That was the last thing I wanted to mention here, that some of the most central elements of a data democracy to you is to enable teams to let them do whatever they want to do with data. And I guess that is a very, very nice and simple way to phrase a democracy, a data democracy. And so that was my takeaways, Malcolm. I'm very happy that you wanted to join the show.
Just let me say, Ole, thank you very much for the invitation to be on the podcast. And also thank you for all the work that you're doing in this area.
Malcolm, likewise, your experience is quite inspiring for me, and I hope we get to meet physically, discuss more. Take care.
Thank you.
Hi there. Okay, so these are the takeaways from my conversation with Malcolm Chisholm. And first of all, the data leader takeaways. As a data leader, you should move. Malcolm started as a programmer, but he continued and evolved into doing strategic advisory. So remember, education does not stop with you ending your studies. You should study all your life to be able to move and have the career that you really want to have as a data leader. Also, you should understand the IT requirements from the business, and you should be able to translate that into the reality that the IT department has. And finally, you should understand IT history as a data leader. It will give you a strategic advantage that your competitors do rarely have, and you should use that. And so for the data democracy takeaways, also remember the past. In this case, you should remember the past because it's important for the data democracy in your company. Technology fades, but the reason why people use certain technologies, what they wanted to obtain with it, and how they actually used it is something that you can use to build a data democratic culture in your company. Also, the takeaway I got from Malcolm on data democracy is that there has always been an IT business divide, and we recognize that in the global data community, but Malcolm had some very crisp advice on how to end that divide, and that is my third takeaway, and that is that the business should be enabled to do whatever it wants to do, regardless of the IT department. And this is a little radical, but if you think about it, not that radical after all, because we shouldn't think of the business doing IT as shadow IT. Instead, we should think of it as end user computing, which is simply IT enablement for everyone. So that was Malcolm's input on my takeaways on it. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.